Hello, friend. Welcome to Grandpa's Horror Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your own stories. All story rights reserved to original authors. Join us now and let our stories come to life. I used Chat to write my stories for me, but things started to get terrifying. I'm an indie horror author, and when I say indie, that's really just a cool way of saying unknown. I write short horror anthologies and self-publish them on Amazon. It's a good thing I have a real day job, because there's no way in hell I could support myself on writing alone. Anyway, for the past several months, I've been brainstorming ways to increase my revenue. And suddenly, in the middle of the night, it came to me. Artificial intelligence. I could make ChatGPT or whatever was the up-and-coming AI write stories for me. Then I could slap them all in a book. Say I wrote them and Viola. Instant cash. My first prompt was pretty vague. Write a horror story. ChatGPT spit out something pretty generic, but it was actually better than I expected it to be. On a dark and stormy night, Sarah was sitting home alone. Suddenly, she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man standing on the porch. Something about him looked off, and she realized it was because he was smiling to why. I won't bore you with the whole story, but basically the man came inside the house, the lights went out in a conveniently timed blackout, and then he killed her. Not good enough, but also not terrible. So I decided to try again and be a little more specific with my prompt. Write a horror story about a doppelganger. On a dark and stormy night, a young woman named Emily was watching TV home alone. She heard a footstep outside the window. When she looked up, she saw a woman looking in the window. However, the woman looked just like her, except for the bloody gash on her head. I read on and began to smile. It wasn't just good. It was great, heart-tracing scenes of the doppelganger stalking her through the house, a final twist where the injured doppelganger was actually coming to warn the main character about her impending death. It was a lot better than anything I'd written recently. I brought the story over to a new Word document and edited it up. Then I posted it to all my social media pages and it blew up. Jackpot. I got 2,000 new followers. My sales went through which had been languishing there for years and began rapid-fire copy-pasting them into the AI. Any story that was halfway decent went right into the queue. But then things started to get a little weird. I entered the prompt. Write a horror story about a creepy monster who lives in the basement. Hannah had always been afraid of the basement. It was always dark down there and there were lots of cobwebs. She always let Mommy or Daddy go into the basement for her, but one night her parents were out. She was too scared to ask her babysitter, so when her rainbow ball rolled down the steps, she decided to go down there herself. I stopped. I had a rainbow ball. As a little girl, it was one of my favorite toys, and there was one night that it rolled into the basement. Nothing happened. There wasn't a monster down there, but it was still a creepy experience that I vividly remember 20 years later. Just a coincidence, I told myself, taking a long sip of wine. I've generated like 50 stories at this point. There are bound to be some weird coincidences. But still, Chat seemed to always go the vague route. Why would it say a rainbow ball That seemed like an oddly specific detail. I shook my head and entered the next prompt. Write a horror story about someone who sees something terrifying on their Ring camera. Johnny installed a Ring camera next to his doorbell for his own safety and security. One night, he was woken up at 3:24 a.m. by a notification on his phone. When he opened the camera feed, he saw an old woman in a white dress standing in his front yard, standing next to the old well. I had an old well in my front yard, one of those little stone ones with a peaked roof. The house was old, and it had been here when I bought it, even though the well itself had been filled in long ago. I continued reading, but no other details matched my house. I let out a sigh of relief, then entered the next prompt. Write a horror story about a woman who is visited by a vengeful spirit. But the words Chat spit out made my blood run cold. On a dark and stormy night, Blair was home alone, reading a book. It used my name, Blair, and all the other stories. It used very common, generic first names: Sarah, Emily, Johnny. I held my breath as the words popped up, one by one, on my screen. She was starting to get sleepy, but then she heard a noise coming from her front porch. She strained her ears, listening for a knock, but none came. I picked up the glass of wine, my hands beginning to shake. I took a sip. Thump. Must just be the wind, I whispered to myself. The next sentence popped up on the screen. Blair thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. The glass fell out of my hand. It shattered to a million pieces, and dark wine oozed across the linoleum like blood. Fuck. I grabbed a towel from the kitchen and began to sop up the mess. Just another coincidence. That's what all the horror stories say when there's a weird sound. Must be the wind, must be the house settling, etc., etc. If it were just that, maybe I could persuade myself. But the rainbow ball, the old well, and using my name, I looked up from cleaning, my throat dry, and read the next paragraph. As Blair cleaned up the wine she'd spilled, she heard the sound again, louder this time. Oh, no, no. Thump. I jumped. My hands shook as I held the wet rag in my hands. Hello, I called out, my voice echoing in the empty house. No answer. I jumped up and ran over to every door, making sure they were all locked. Then I checked the windows. Panting, I ran back to the computer. Blair made sure all the doors were locked, but it was too late. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It was already inside the house. All the blood drained out of my face. I grabbed the computer and ran down the hallway, locking myself in my bedroom. Then I dragged my dresser across the carpet in front of the door. Thump. It sounded like it was right outside my door. I backed away from the door until my back was pressed against the window. Then I turned towards the cold glass and saw something that made my blood run cold. There was an old woman wearing a white tattered dress standing next to the well, and then she began to walk towards me. I gripped the windowsill, my knuckles white, wishing this were a two-story house. But in a few minutes, she'd be at the window, with only this thin pane of glass between us. She continued towards me in strange, halting movements, as if she didn't know quite how to walk, as if she was trying to imitate everything she'd observed about human movement. Imitating, like an AI. Thump, the door shook. A shadow appeared in the crack underneath. No, No. Tap, tap, tap. I whipped round to see a woman with her face pressed up against the window. Not the old woman. A woman who looked just like me, with a bloody gash on her forehead, warning me of my own death. Like in the story, the door shook again, and I pictured the man with the too wide smile outside. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "I'm so sorry." Thump, tap, tap, tap. Shuffle, shuffle. In a last, frantic attempt to save my life, I grabbed the computer and closed out of chat. And just like that, the nose stopped. I crouched down and peered at the crack underneath the door. No shadow. I ran over to the window. Nothing. Leaves swayed slightly in the breeze. Water glinted off the grass. I collapsed onto the bed and began to sob. I didn't fall asleep until dawn broke and the first rays on sunlight illuminated the only trace they left behind, a smudge of dark blood on the glass. So I'm begging you, please don't use any artificial intelligence like chat to write your stories for you, or you might end up like me. //www-reddit.com/r/BlairDaniels